what is the cause of this cautiousness with AI? And do you think it is about do you think it is more about that that ethical concern or concern about legislation, or do you think it is more just about, kind of the culture around it or legacy technology? What do you think it is? What's the main
I think
cause?
it's a mix of everything. And if you look at the industries, different industries, some industries are more regulated than others. Like
Right.
let's look at financial institution. I'm an RBC customer, so I definitely would not want RBC to play with AI, not in a responsive way, right? Because we hold my money. Some other industry are not as highly regulated, and like big tech, right? That's why we're on the front of innovation. I do think you mentioned legacy technology. That is a huge barrier in my
Yeah.
experience because some of these ERP systems are decades long or like
Really?
old.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even if you want to implement a cloud based AI solution, you can't plug them in because
No.
some of these legacy systems were just
Hmm.
not designed. We were not
Right.
developed at that
Mm.
time. I know it's changing, but it requires more transformational effort. But you think that's why some of the startups, I think we're moving quicker than some of the larger companies because we start everything fresh. And you also mentioned culture. That is a very important component, especially in finance. In finance, you would hear some people say, if it's not broken, don't touch it, don't change it.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think that mentality needs to change. But I also think that you could have good intentions, but you
Mm.
could have great culture. But if you notice, MIT recently came up with research which was said 95% of AI efforts fail in a
Mhm.
corporation.
Of course.
It's because there's a disconnect between all this great intention, yet we want to do the transformation and we want to be great and doing this AI and actual execution and implementation because you sometimes don't have right people. Sometimes it's too political. Sometimes it takes a long time to make decisions about anything. Or sometimes you don't have right people at the table, right? That's why I think it
Yeah.
feels a lot at the implementation stage. With while a lot of companies could have good intention.
Yeah, I can totally understand that mentality as well of like, well, it works. What we do works just about. So as long as like nothing's going horribly wrong, I think sometimes people are hesitant to change anything because they think, well, if we make that change, we're taking a risk that something could go wrong. So why mess with what we have? I think that maybe is the mentality. And also, like you said, people who've been doing it for a long time, it is a hassle, isn't it? To learn a new way of doing something, I think. And we're going to get onto that a little bit, I think, like the kind of AI literacy,
True.
which is big. We can get onto that now, I suppose. Because we can start talking about how do we change this actually? Like, what do you think? Like, what are the main what do you see as being the thing that we can start doing to shift this and really kind of integrate AI into finance? Is it through kind of education? Is it through advocacy, having the right people at the table? What do you see? What do you think?
So you mentioned one important point about people being in the same place for a
Yeah,
long time. And that's a real problem.
yeah.
Because if you've been doing the same thing over and over the same way, and someone comes to you and says, you know what was a better way to do it, you're going to look at them and say, well, I know what I'm doing, right?
Mm.
And this is the best way of doing it. So that mentality of having people doing the same thing over and over needs to change. And this is where, when you said, how could we change it? We as leaders have a lot of power to change it.
Yeah.
I spent some time, I would say, at Amazon, which is probably one of the most transformational environment I've ever been to. Whenever I come to a different organization, I could immediately spot things that could be changed.
Mhm.
And I start with observing and then suggesting change. So I empower my team to think the same way. And that's what we need to be doing, making sure we start change in mentality.
Mhm.
in a way of thinking that it's not going to eliminate the job, but it's actually going to make finance more valuable and
Mm.
create some insight which could add to the business.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a really, really great point. And I've had guests on here in the past who've kind of talked about, this I guess perception of finance leaders as the kind of number crunchers in the back.
Mm.
Like I guess a very kind of not necessarily very innovation heavy. And I guess that speaks to what you're talking about, which is that once you change that mindset and you think of yourself as being like, well, how much more could we do in terms of how we're interpreting the data and how we're using it to inform decisions that are being made at a broader scale, then that then leads to, I guess, more enthusiasm about embracing these tools, doesn't it? I think once you have that mindset shift, what do you think?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, I think we right now we're talking about the AI in finance, right? So overall, the role of finance needs to change. I speak at a lot of CFO conferences, and it's always come up. How could the perception of finance could be changed from being a gatekeeper, someone who says no, to someone who says yes?
And that wraps up another episode of the 2 Cents Podcast. Thank you to our listeners for taking the time to tune in. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear from more finance leaders like today's guest, please subscribe to the show and leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast app. It would mean so much to me and my guests if you can show them some love and appreciation for sharing so many great insights with us on the show. Again, thanks for listening. See you in the next one.